What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today, where we're talking about running backs that we're going to be starting and sitting here in Week 11 fantasy football. Now, before we get into all the players and all the matchups, there are timestamps down below. Hit the like button for timestamps. But also, we have something to celebrate here. As you can see right over my shoulder, we've hit 175,000 subscribers here on this channel. We can't thank you enough for all the support over the years, but we're not done now. We're making our way to 200, but we got to celebrate the milestones, right? We got to celebrate. So what do I have today? A signed Lamar Jackson. Man, what? Come on, get the sleeve out of the... Anyway, you get the idea. It's a signed Lamar Jackson jersey right here from our friends over at Pristine Auction. Certificate of Authenticity is in the bag. That's a big one right there. But we got to do something big for hitting that milestone. So here's how you're entered into this giveaway. All you got to do, hit the like button, leave a comment down below, let me know that you're interested in said jersey, and make sure you have your free account signed up at Pristine Auction. It doesn't cost you anything, and we're going to put a $10 credit into your account once you do so. If you've already signed up, you're already eligible. Hit that like button, leave that comment, because we'll be giving that away on this very show next week. So make sure you stay tuned. But now is the time we dive into all these matchups. We're going to kick it off Thursday Night Football. Tennessee Titans, Green Bay Packers. And I kind of like kicking off Thursday Night Football with a couple of guys that we already really know we should be starting every single week anyway, right? I mean, you got Derrick Henry for the Tennessee Titans, who's coming off probably his worst game of the year. 19 carries for 53 yards. Pretty much shows that he is but a mere mortal, right? Just like the rest of us, he is human. He ended a 5-game streak where he had over 100 plus total yards in each game, and this is only his 3rd game all season without a touchdown. Does that mean that we hit the panic button with Derrick Henry? No, we do not. He's still a lock for over 20 touches a week. On the year, Green Bay allowing 21 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's 13th most in the NFL. Now, when it comes to injuries, most of it on the defensive side of the football here, but there are also 2 offensive linemen questionable to play in Ben Jones and Aaron Brewer, just something to pay attention to. But when it comes to X Factor, Tennessee went from a team that couldn't complete a pass to a wide receiver 2 weeks ago with Malik Willis at quarterback to bringing back Ryan Tannehill off injury and having him throw 19 for 36 for 255 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions in a close game against the Denver Broncos. A little bit of an outlier? I kind of think so. That's the most pass attempts he's had in a game all year long. We're still firing up the king and starting Derrick Henry for the Green Bay Packers. We got Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Now, I know Aaron Jones can be a headache to start every single week, but with the ceiling he possesses, it's way too high to ever sit this guy. He's only scored 10 plus points in 5 of his 10 games this season, 50% of the time. But in 4 of them, he's scoring over 17 fantasy points in the contest and most likely helping carry you to victory almost by himself. You can't sit guys that possess that type of ceiling. Now on the season, Aaron Jones averaging right around 16 touches a game, and that's really where we want that to be. That's kind of the sweet spot for Aaron Jones, but he just had 24 carries in week 10. How high is that? That's the most he's had in a game since 2019, and it was in a game in which he was coming off an injury that many believed at that time he may miss some games. So obviously, Aaron Jones is good to go, but now he's going up against the Tennessee Titans. They've been great against the run all year long, allowing only 16.5 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's 4th fewest in the NFL, and also allowed the fewest rushing touchdowns of any team in the NFL as well, at only 2 this entire season. When it comes to injuries, though, and you look at the Green Bay Packers, it's starting to look more and more like a CVS receipt. You know how you go buy like a pack of water, like one thing at CVS and your receipt is like 4 feet long? That's kind of what the injury report is looking like for the Green Bay Packers. Pretty much everyone is questionable right now, but for the most part, they're all going to be out there here on Thursday. We'll pay closer attention as we get closer to that kickoff, but I think we're going to be with all of our main guys there. No issues. The X Factor is something I had to bump up a little bit here. For someone that was thought to be hurt like he was a week ago, and then to be totally fine, get all that volume, 24 touches, it just shows that they're good to go. Now, Christian Watson's explosion last week is a good thing for Aaron Jones. We need some success in this passing game. Once we see that success, success, it opens up running lanes for Aaron Jones. So don't get worried that the touchdowns are going to Christian Watson. In the long run, though, that's a good thing, though, for Aaron Jones and his owners. We're going to fire up Aaron Jones here once again on Thursday Night Football. As for A.J. Dillon, no, I mean, he's just not doing much of anything. He's not sucking, but he's not scoring touchdowns. He's not getting overly involved in the passing game, not getting a ton of volume, really not doing anything that great, right? So we're going to continue to sit A.J. Dillon. Now let's move on to Sunday football, where we have the Chicago Bears and Atlanta Falcons. And for Chicago, I may break my streak here and start somebody for the first time in what feels like a month or so in this backfield. When it comes to the word production, it doesn't jump off the paper when you're talking about the Chicago Bears backfield. Right now, Justin Fields is just eating up all the rushing yards that are available, and only one time since week 4 has one of these running backs eclipsed 75 rushing yards. Both of them averaging right between 11 and 14 touches a game. Pretty even split for the most part. Going up against Atlanta, not a bad matchup. They allow the 10th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 21.4 per game. But where this gets more and more confusing is Khalil Herbert himself is dealing with a hip injury suffered just last week. Very little information on it, and it's still unclear whether or not he's going to play this week or not. If he doesn't, that's going to give a huge boost in touches to one David Montgomery. Now, we saw this backfield somewhat thrive, I guess, earlier in the season when David Montgomery went out. Khalil Herbert was a fantasy viable option because the volume was there. When they're together, it's just not. So if we're going to be without Herbert, all of a sudden David Montgomery becomes an option for those that are out there dealing with injuries or maybe some bye weeks. We do have a few teams on bye this week, right? We got the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Miami Dolphins, Seattle Seahawks, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're going to be without a few weapons there. All of a sudden, David Montgomery would have some value if we don't have Khalil Herbert. Now, if Herbert is playing in this game, I don't really want to touch this backfield very much, but if Herbert is out, I will fire up David Montgomery, and until we get more information, I got DeMont as a start. Their opponents, Cordero Patterson and the Atlanta Falcons, that absolutely sucked on Thursday night for Cordero Patterson. 6 touches. 6. The week after he came back from injury where he had 14 touches, looking strong 2 weeks ago, and then he comes out and gets 6 touches. Part of me thinks it was just due to bad weather and they don't want him to re-aggravate any injuries. But on the other side of it, he's out there returning kicks. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Cordero Patterson has arguably been their best weapon for 2 years in Atlanta. And it's a division game and you're really not using... I just don't get Atlanta, right? For a team that's struggling as much as they are to even be in contention in their own division, yet taking away some of the best talent on their roster in Kyle Pitts and Cordero Patterson, it's like the damn Twilight Zone up in here. I don't really know what's going on in Atlanta, but with all 3 of these guys getting touches, right? We got Cordero Patterson, Tyler Algier, and then Caleb Huntley as well. The volume is just being split up so much, we're not getting enough touches to just one guy. I have to think that Cordero Patterson is going to be getting more volume as the weeks go on. Like I said, they're contending for the division, which nobody had anticipated. You have to utilize the best weapons you have, and this right here is what you would call the perfect opportunity to do so. They're going up against Chicago, who allows the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at over 24 per game. No new major injury concerns here in Atlanta, and any one of these guys has a chance at a touchdown each and every week. But I'm going back to the guy that has proven time and time again to be the best weapon in this offense, the big-time playmaker, the guy that finds the end zone more times than the others. And let's just hope he's not out there being a kick returner. We're firing up Cordero Patterson here. Once again, how about the Carolina Panthers and Baltimore Ravens? We'll start it with D'Onta Foreman. And since week 7, as being the number 1 running back here in Carolina, he is running back 7 overall in fantasy football, averaging just over 17 fantasy points per game. Has had at least 118 yards rushing in 3 out of the last 4 games played. And really, is the only consistent member of the offense here in Carolina right now, averaging over 17 touches a game in 3 of his last 4, and just had 31 touches a week ago against Atlanta in that bad weather game. But this is a much more difficult matchup here this week. The Baltimore Ravens, they only allow 18.6 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's 10th fewest in the NFL. Plus, they're coming off the bye week in which they had another week to prep for this matchup. But most importantly, they're going back to Baker Mayfield due to PJ Walker being injured, and that does not help D'Onta Foreman at all. At least with PJ Walker under center, opposing defenses knew that at any time he wanted to go deep down the field. Do they have that same fear from Baker Mayfield? Probably not, which means the defenses are going to be able to focus on the running game just a little bit more. But with the amount of volume he's getting, the production we've seen over the last month of the season, even though this is a difficult matchup, I can't afford to sit D'Onta Foreman here right now. Chuba Hubbard, even though he's back, not seeing huge volume, and what he is getting isn't doing a whole lot with it. So as of right now, we're still firing up Foreman, which will then take us to his opponents, the Baltimore Ravens and Kenyon Drake, and we'll talk about Gus Edwards as well. And I'm not going to lie, I did not miss this backfield when they were gone on their bye week just last week. It's another week of who's hurt, who's going to be active, and having to wait until Saturday to really find out. Now, everything looks like Gus Edwards could return this week. Chances are likely of that happening. Does that mean that it's going to happen? No. We need to see how he responds to this week's practice before really finding out for sure. How much are they really going to push him, though? Remember, he came back from a torn ACL, played like a game and a half, left with a hamstring injury, and are they just going to work him back in slowly? Are they just going to feed him to the wolves and have him get 20 touches in his first game back? Now, part of me thinks that they would want to work him in slowly so they have him rest of season. They didn't do that the last time, though, and I wouldn't put it past John Harbaugh to just go out there and rely on the guy that he loves, Gus Edwards. But Kenyon Drake has been pretty solid. Don't forget, he had 23 points in week 9, their game before the bye week. Now going up against Carolina, it's a great matchup. They allow 24.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's 5th most in the NFL. Now the bye week came at a great time for Baltimore to somewhat get healthy. Don't forget, they were also without Mark Andrews, who got injured before their bye week. So hopefully they're a little bit closer to full strength now than what they were prior to the bye week. We just can't count out John Harbaugh here. He is the X factor to me, and why I had to drop it down slightly for Kenyon Drake. Gus Edwards is a John Harbaugh guy, and when in the past he's been healthy, John Harbaugh has given him volume. We just don't know how healthy he is just yet, and at this time, Kenyon Drake is the better option in this backfield. Let's move on to Cleveland and Buffalo now. And last week wasn't a crazy good week for Nick Chubb, not by any means. We could have done without the fumble, Chubby. Chubby, high and tight, Chubby. Got to hold on to it. No fumbles. We don't need the fumbles as of right now. Plus, it was a blowout. That kind of played a part in him having a lower ceiling as well. But he has touchdowns now in all but 2 games this season, and there's still no big threat of Kareem Hunt taking over any part of this workload. Right now, Chubb's sitting just under 20 touches a game, where Hunt is struggling to reach 10 per contest. I really wish this was an easier matchup, though. They're going up against the Buffalo Bills, who allow on average 19.8 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's 17th. That's like average in the league. That's middle of the pack. But we're talking about going to Buffalo against a team who now had a gut-wrenching loss just last week at home. They've lost 2 straight. They're going to be at home going up against Cleveland. This is just not a great scenario for the Browns to go out there and have an opportunity to run the ball a lot. I would not be surprised if Buffalo tries to come out pedal to the metal, get an early lead, and make a statement. And if that happens, we may not see a whole lot of the running game from Nick Chubb. That's why he's dropped down a few points here when it comes to X Factor. Their opponents, it's dammit Devin Singletary of the Buffalo Bills, and he has finally popped his rushing touchdown cherry for 2022, and he did it by getting 2 of them just last week. He's only had one game all year with over 100 total yards, yet finds himself at running back 25 on the verge of being a running back 2 in fantasy football, averaging just over 13 touches per game, not really losing any work to anyone. In just last week's game, we saw James Cook with 5 touches, Naheem Hines, somebody they traded for, only 1 touch. I guess I don't really care about Nyheim Hines. I just wanted to take him away from Indianapolis for whatever reason. But you can run on Cleveland, and that's a good sign here for this backfield of the Buffalo Bills. Cleveland is allowing the second most fantasy points of all teams in the league to opposing running backs at 27.6, and last week they were just torched by the backfield duo of Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. of the Miami Dolphins, who scored a combined 38 fantasy points in half PPR scoring. When it comes to injuries, most of them on the defensive side of the football. Josh Allen didn't really seem to be elbowless out there. He looked like he was still moving the ball down the field for the most part, maybe not 100%, but not really holding this offense back either. But when it comes to X Factor, I can't put this number very high. He's just not a guy that's had a very high ceiling so far this year. It's a great matchup for him though, and for that reason, I'm going to say he could be a bye week fill-in. There's worse options out there in fantasy football for sure. I may have him a little bit lower in my rankings, not somebody who I'm overly confident in, but given the matchup, given the bye weeks, not a bad option for you here this week. How about the Washington Commandos and the Houston Texans? And I'm just going to file this one away in the Vino category, right? Because who knows what's going on in the backfield of the Washington Commandos. 43 touches combined between these two in last week's game. They also combined for 27.9 fantasy points between the two of them. And that was against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, both of them had touchdowns, but there is no consistency here whatsoever. Brian Robinson Jr. just saw 26 damn carries last week. 26? That's a career high for sure. He still hasn't averaged over 4 yards per carry in a game this season, though. He really needs that volume to score points. Gibby, he's hovering right around 15 touches a game or so as well. Also needs touchdowns to become a start. But now these guys get a matchup against Houston, and the Texans allow over 30. Yes, 30 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, the most in the NFL. How can we not start a running back against the Houston Texans? I have no idea. Now, when it comes to injuries, nothing really new, but the matchup alone makes both of these guys an option. Do I feel safe about it? Heck no, I don't. Two guys that are touchdown dependent, and we have the potential of a Carson Wentz return this week, which would mean even less scoring opportunities for this offense. I would prefer Taylor Heinicke continue to be the quarterback in Washington. Unfortunately, at this time, I don't have the right to make that call. I don't run the Washington Commandos. I have both these guys as low-end flex plays, bye-week fill-ins at best, just due to the matchup. Now, their opponent, Dameon Pierce, currently running back 14 overall in fantasy football, coming off another solid game in which he saw over 100 total yards once again, which is something he's now done in 6 of the last 7 games this season. Also had a career high with 28 receiving yards. Still, one of only 6 running backs in the NFL that's averaging over 20 touches a game. Washington playing pretty well against the run, though. We just saw it against Philadelphia, right? Kind of shut down the Eagles' running game. They're only allowing 18.4 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. No new major injury concerns here. And with that volume and consistency, there's really no way we can sit Dameon Pierce, even if the matchup is a little bit tougher like it is this week. And then all of a sudden we get word that Eno Benjamin, who was recently cut by the Arizona Cardinals, has now joined the Houston Texans. Do I care about that for week 11? No, I don't. Do I care about it going forward? Maybe just a little bit. It's something to pay attention to. As of right now, Dameon Pierce has been the lone bright spot in this offense. He's done whatever has been asked of him here, especially over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Love Dameon Pierce. Love what he's doing on the field. I can't imagine them kind of bringing in Eno Benjamin to really take away much of a role from Dameon Pierce. He's not a guy who's overly involved in the passing game. Maybe that's where they sprinkle in a little bit more Eno Benjamin. But for right now, not worried about it. We're still starting Dameon Pierce. How about the Philadelphia Eagles and Indianapolis Colts? And we'll kick it off with Miles Sanders here. He's currently running back 17 overall, arguably coming off his worst game of the season where he only had 12 carries for 54 yards and no receiving work. But overall, it was just a down game in general for the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Washington Commandos played so well. We got to give them some credit. Now, on the season, Sanders still averaging right around 17 touches a game, going up against Indianapolis, who allows 20.9 fantasy points per contest, 14th most in the NFL. When it comes to injury concerns, Dallas Goedert not feeling too fancy right now. He's going to be missing some time. Maybe that's an uptick in some passing targets, hopefully to Miles Sanders, probably a little bit more Kenneth Gainwell as well. But for right now, I have to think that Philadelphia bounces back in this matchup. They're arguably one of the best teams in the NFL. They didn't play like it last week. Now they're going to have to pull up their bootstraps and they're going to have to go back at it against the Indianapolis Colts on the road. And I still like the pieces of this offense. Miles Sanders may not be some smash start this week, but he's definitely going to be a start nonetheless. His opponent, Jonathan Taylor, is he back? Is JT back? Has Jeff Saturday lit the fire of the offensive line and taken the shackles off the offense? Because we talked about this last week. We wanted Matt Ryan back under center. No, not because Matt Ryan is an elite all-pro quarterback. It's because he gives us the best opportunity at scoring fantasy points, and that is exactly what happened. Matt Ryan came back under center, and Jonathan Taylor went off. 22 carries for 147 yards and a touchdown. His best game since week 1. Full disclosure, that was against the Las Vegas Raiders, who are not overly great against running backs, so it was an easier matchup for JT, but it was great to see him break free and this entire offense kind of open up just a little bit. Now, on the season, he's still averaging just about 20 touches a game, and man, did he look good in that long touchdown run. It didn't seem like he was very hampered by an ankle injury, which is what we've heard for weeks. He looked just fine. Now, Philadelphia, as of late, they have struggled against opposing running backs, allowing just about 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and teams have kind of realized lately that, hey, if we can run the ball successfully against Philadelphia, we'll keep the clock running and we'll limit their amount of possessions they have, which means that limits the amount of times they can score touchdowns on that team. So I expect a lot of teams to start running a lot against Philadelphia to keep the ball out of their offense's hands. No other main new injury concerns here. I just don't want to get too excited too quick. We all know that you start a healthy Jonathan Taylor. I know that probably everybody who owns him is going to start him here this week. But before I really get excited, before that eggplant meter kind of explodes, we need to see a little bit of consistency in this backfield. But in the meantime, we're still firing up Jonathan Taylor. Which will take us now over to the New York Jets and New England Patriots. We'll start off on the Jets side of the football with Michael Carter and J-Rob James Robinson, another team that I did not miss during their bye week. It's a backfield that can't produce, has multiple options, no consistency. Both these guys had a touchdown in the game before the bye week, but really didn't do much else other than that. Neither one of these guys is going to be a big volume guy. Neither one of them are overly efficient. They're going to hover right around 10 to 13 touches per game. But they faced the Patriots back in week 8 and already struggled against them. Now they get the Patriots in New England, coming off their bye week as well. And New England only allows 15.4 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's second fewest in fantasy football. The offensive line, still more than banged up. They have lost so many starting pieces here throughout the year. There's a time to gamble. There's a time that you may not have any other options. This is just not one of those times where I'm looking at this backfield. I'm looking elsewhere. They're both going to be sits for me here. Now, as for the Patriots, we got Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harrison. I'm glad to see Ramondre back off his bye, that's for sure. He's currently the running back 11 overall in fantasy football, while Damian Harris still continues to work his way back from injury. I don't think he's yet to be 100% healthy. Stevenson, on average, right around 18 touches per game, but has seen at least 7 targets in 3 straight ball games, which I absolutely love to see. Now they're going up against the Jets. The Jets allow just over 18 fantasy points per game to running backs, and they're easier to run on than they are to throw on. Plus, Devontae Parker, another name currently questionable in this offense. Is Damian Harris still limited? He's technically still questionable as well. We know the Pats are a run-heavy team. They've attempted the 6th fewest passes of all teams in the NFL here year to date. I love Damian Harris, but I don't think he's 100% healthy just yet, and I think the New England Patriots continue to ride the hot hand of Ramondre Stevenson season, and that's the guy that I'm starting here in this backfield. Let's move on to the Rams and the Saints now. Does anyone else gag? Like, when you look at the depth chart of the Los Angeles, do you get that taste? Like, ugh. I mean, another backfield that splits touches, has poor production, low volume, a hurt offensive line, and they're now missing their top offensive weapon in the passing game in Cooper Kupp. Like, what sounds great about this backfield? None of them can even get between 8 and 10 touches consistently per game. Now they're going up against New Orleans, a middle-of-the-pack defense that allows right around 19 fantasy points per contest. But like I said, multiple offensive linemen are hurt. Kupp, he won't play. Technically right now, Matthew Stafford is still questionable to play, even though I do think he clears the concussion protocol in time for this weekend. It is just a mess in LA. There is nothing that you can look at here in this backfield and say, you know what? I think it's worth a chance, because it's not. Right now, they're just not good, and they're not options for fantasy football. The opponent, Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints. And last week, well, last week sucked worse than that. Never mind, I'm not going to get into that. It was bad. 45 total yards on 11 touches is the equivalent to pissing directly into the wind. It's not worth a damn out there, and it absolutely sucked for Alvin Kamara owners just last week. That is now back-to-back games with less than 65 total yards and single-digit carries. I just don't understand how a guy who has averaged 18 touches a game all year can't even get over 12 touches now in back-to-back games in which they're trailing. The guy is a great pass-catching option for this offense, yet over the last 2 games, his passing production, his volume has dropped by 50%, only getting around 4 targets a game, where earlier in the season, he was getting 8, 9 targets a contest. Where has that all gone? Why are they going away from Alvin Kamara? Now, this offensive line is still banged up. We got Andrews Pete, we got James Hurst, Trevor Penning, Eric McCoy, all banged up on this offensive line. I get it, but there's also no Mark Ingram either, and this is when Alvin Kamara is supposed to thrive. These back-to-back duds are actually pretty concerning for me as of right now. From a coaching standpoint, I know that Landry has returned, but that is no excuse for actually abandoning your best player in Alvin Kamara. I'm actually heading over to Prize Picks right now, and I'm going to go the under on the rushing prop of Alvin Kamara, which is currently set at 59.5 rushing yards. He's missed that number in back-to-back games, and I'm going the under here. Once again, if you haven't joined us on Prize Picks, make sure you do so. All you got to do, set up a new account, use referral code Headliners. If you make up to a $10 deposit, we'll match your deposit up to $100. So you get free money, right? So go ahead and make sure you do that and have a lot of fun with us here on Prize Picks. But yeah, I'm worried about Alvin Kamara. He's a fringe start still. You have to think that they rely on this guy a little bit more in the passing game. Hopefully just not the rushing game, so we can win some money on Prize Picks. How about the Detroit Lions and New York Giants? And what we have here is another week of Jamal Williams clearly being the leader in this backfield for the Detroit Lions. Now, luckily, DeAndre Swift keeps finding the end zone, but 6 carries for 6 yards last week wasn't enough to really go along with it. Plus, only had 1 reception. On the year, Jamal Williams hovering right around 16 touches per game, where Swift is now below 10 per contest. Now they're going up against the Giants. The Giants, they allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs at only 18.2 per game. Now, despite all the reports saying that DeAndre Swift is pretty healthy, his usage says different. Now, this offensive line also banged up as well, but everything on paper says to sit DeAndre Swift. Nothing is pointing in his favor, but I'm going to tell you something, and pay close attention. He's listed as a sit for a reason, but at some point over the next few weeks, this guy is going to go off and have a huge game. More than likely, it's probably going to happen on your bench, and you're going to be disappointed. But let me tell you this. Don't let that disappoint you, because once you see the return of volume, the return of big plays, the return of points, it means you have on your hands again another bona fide stud once it gets to that point. It sucks to sit him, but right now, there's just not really a lot going for him to argue to start him, other than just hoping for the ceiling and waiting until it gets there. How about his opponent in Saquon Barkley? I think we start Saquon Barkley every single week. He's currently the running back 4 overall, averaging just over 18 fantasy points per game. Coming off another big rushing day, it was against the Houston Texans, who everybody runs against. He's now had touchdowns in 6 of the last 9 games played. But what's weird, he hasn't had a touchdown in the receiving game yet. Kind of expecting him to be a little bit higher in that category coming into the season for sure. Still averaging over 25 touches a game, the leader in the NFL there. Going up against the Lions, who allow the 7th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 22.4 per game. Offensive tackle Evan Neal and tight end Daniel Bellinger, they're still questionable to play. But these are the matchups we like, right? This is why we get excited for fantasy football. When you get Saquon Barkley against the Lions, you know it's a smash start. How about the Las Vegas Raiders and Denver Broncos? We'll start off with Josh Jacobs and the Raiders. And finally, there's life in Josh Jacobs. There's no coincidence that when this guy goes over 20 touches for the first time in 3 weeks, he has another top 10 performance. Now, we need this volume to continue, though, because he's not being overly efficient. With the volume there, we can expect bigger numbers. He had 28 carries for 144 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 receptions for 31 yards against this same defense back in week 4. I would love to see that again against the Denver Broncos here this week. Now, on the season, Broncos allowing just under 19 fantasy points per game. The biggest injury of concern here for the Raiders, though, has to be the pride of the players. And really, upon further review, it's got to be Josh Jacobs' inability to make adjustments, right? There's a problem there. His give-a-damn meter must be busted or something, because I tweeted about this earlier in the week, how the Bears coaching staff should be commended for coming into the season with a plan, having it fail miserably, and then pivoting their plan to really build something around the strength of the players that they have. And we're seeing that now with Justin Fields and Cole Kmet in this offense, and they're scoring more points. The Raiders are just content with just starting off with a plan, having it not work, and then continuing the same damn plan instead of change. That's a problem. They got to change something there in Las Vegas. Otherwise, they're going to be a new coaching staff in a short minute. We know they're still without Darren Waller. They're still without Hunter Renfrow. You have to expect that means more volume going the way of Josh Jacobs. You just can't afford to sit this guy as of right now. He's sitting inside the top 10. His opponents, you can definitely afford to sit these guys. It's another backfield that I just did not miss in week 10 on their bye week. Another non-productive backfield, a heavy split, an offense that overall is struggling, and a lack of overall scoring. It's going to be a stretch for either Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray, or Chase Edmonds to even remotely come close to averaging 10 touches a game. It's a great matchup for them, though. Going up against the Vegas Raiders, they allow over 23 fantasy points per contest. That's 6th most in the NFL, but this offensive line is in shambles. I'm talking they are hurting in Denver. Lloyd Cushenberry, Graham Glasgow, Billy Turner, Cam Fleming. That's a lot of meat up front that is struggling to play as of right this second. I really don't see how you can look at any one of these guys either and really feel comfortable starting any one of them. Somewhere in here, one of these guys is going to score a touchdown this week. Who is that going to be? I have no idea. It's too risky. I'm avoiding the entire backfield in Denver. How about the Dallas Cowboys and Minnesota Vikings? We got Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard right now is on the verge of being inside the top 15 overall running backs on the season. And here's a crazy stat for you as well. He's only 15 points away from being inside the top 10 on the season. Zeke missing time really helping out Tony Pollard. Now has back-to-back games with over 125 total yards. In week 10, Pollard just saw 25 touches. Now we love that for fantasy football. I would prefer that number be a little bit lower so we can keep him healthy in the game the rest of the season, though. Minnesota is a difficult matchup. They only allow the 6th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs at 17.8 per game. Now, Jerry Jones has insisted and come out repeatedly saying that when Zeke is healthy, Zeke is the guy in this backfield. Is he healthy as of right now? I'm not so sure he is just yet. Either way, though, Tony Pollard is just the better bet in this backfield for the time being. And whether Zeke plays or not, if you have to start one of them in this backfield, Tony Pollard is going to be that guy until we can see Zeke Elliott back to full health. I love what we see from Tony Pollard. Their opponent, Dalvin Cook in the Minnesota Vikings, has now found himself back inside the top 10 overall after his second 100-yard rushing day in Week 10. He's now had 100 yards in 2 of his last 3 games played. Also starting to see the return of some passing work, which is great. He's had at least 5 targets now in 3 straight ball games as well, sitting right around 18 touches or so on average for the entire game. Going up against Dallas, not the easiest to run on unless your name is Aaron Jones, that is. They're allowing only 17.6 fantasy points per game, 5th fewest in the NFL to opposing running backs. It's not ideal right now that offensive lineman Christian Darrisaw is questionable to play with a concussion. That's a name that we're paying attention to. But really the addition to TJ Hockenson in this offense is a huge help to Dalvin Cook. The run blocking ability of TJ Hockenson is really showing that it can benefit Dalvin Cook. And even though it's a difficult matchup, we're starting him regardless. How about the Cincinnati Bengals and Pittsburgh Steelers? We got Joe Mixon coming back off of his bye as well. And first running back I'm excited to see back off his bye week. Don't forget his crazy Week 9 where he had 5 touchdowns, and that performance alone vaulted him all the way up to running back 7 overall on the season. It was also his first 100-plus yard rushing game, and it was definitely one of those situations where the overall team was able to build some confidence, and that's when we know the Cincinnati Bengals really thrive, when they're confident. He's still averaging over 20 touches a game. Going up against Pittsburgh, they allowed just under 19 fantasy points per contest, right around the league average, but Joe Mixon had over 140 total yards against this same defense back in Week 1, in which they lost. There's still some nagging injuries here, but the bye week did help the Cincinnati Bengals overall. Remember, they're still without Jamar Chase, but this is a must-win division game against a team that they've already played this season and that Joe Mixon has found some success again, so automatically we're starting Joe Mixon. How about Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren? Now, I said last week in this video that I was expecting Najee Harris to have his best game of the year, and he did. But it still wasn't a great game. He had 20 touches for 99 rushing yards, and that was about it. Didn't really overly help a lot of people in fantasy football. Still, couldn't get him over that 100-yard total mark. Now, Jaylen Warren, he's not doing much better. He hasn't scored over 10 fantasy points in a game yet this year as well. Najee sitting right around 18 touches a contest, but going up against Cincinnati, very difficult. They allow the 9th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs at 18.6 per contest. Actually, I'm going over to Prize Picks here once again, and I'm going to smash the under on Najee, which is currently set at 52.5 rushing yards. That's a number he's only hit in 2 of his last 5 games played, and now word is coming out that he's dealing with some knee discomfort, some knee soreness, but he's going to be able to play through it. The guy was already struggling. Now you're going to add on top of it that he's not 100% healthy. That is just a recipe for disaster. Like I said, he's had 26 total yards in Week 1 against this defense. Is somebody who really hasn't produced much, if at all, this entire season. He's not getting pass catching work. He's not getting, consistent volume. Hell, Kenny Pickett is stealing goal line carries. Now, if he is ruled out for whatever reason, then all of a sudden we begin to look at Jaylen Warren maybe a little bit closer. But if they're both playing, I'm not interested in either. Which will then take us to Sunday Night Football, the Kansas City Chiefs, Los Angeles Chargers. And we'll start off with the Chiefs and another backfield that I'm not interested in. Did we just witness the death of CEH last week, though? He only played in 4 snaps. Or is this one of those Andy Reid, mind things just to really screw with you, and then next week it's going to be a CEH week? Because Isaiah Pacheco led this backfield with 16 carries for 82 yards, but did have a fumble. We haven't seen any of these guys get consistent touches. Heck, just 2 weeks ago, Isaiah Pacheco only had 6 total touches. Now they're going up against the Chargers. Great matchup. They allow over 27 fantasy points per game, 3rd most in the NFL. We know that Mecole Hardman is banged up. Juju got knocked out last week. That was scary looking. Offensive guard Andrew Wiley, he's also questionable to play. I love this matchup. But which one of these guys do you go with? You have to think it's Isaiah Pacheco, right? That's what everybody kind of thinks. But Andy Reid knows what everybody's thinking, and this would be one of those perfect opportunities for a trap game in which we see CEH go out there and get only 8 touches but scores 2 touchdowns and totally screws everybody over because he's on everyone's bench because everybody thinks it's Isaiah Pacheco's job. This is just one of those situations that there's just too much, inconsistency, not enough clarity, nothing to really go off to say, hey, this is going to be the guy this week, even though it's a great matchup. I can't trust any of them. Austin Ekeler, obviously you're starting Austin Ekeler, number 1 running back in fantasy football right now, even though he had a down game in week 10, a down-ish game, I guess you could say. San Francisco made it a point of making sure that Austin Ekeler did not beat them. It was his first game without a touchdown since September 25th. Let that sink in a little bit. It's almost Thanksgiving, y'all. He's still averaging right around 19 touches a game and has had double-digit targets in 3 of the last 4 contests, now going up against Kansas City. They allow over 21 fantasy points per game. There are a ton of injuries of concern here in Los Angeles, but honestly, all of them lead to Austin Ekeler getting more work. We know about Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, now Gerald Everett hurt as well, but all that means is more passing volume going the way of Austin Ekeler, and there's something to be said with being your team's really only target in the passing game, the safest target in the passing game. We're in store for another double-digit target performance, I believe, and we're surely starting Austin Ekeler, which will take us then to Monday Night Football, the San Francisco 49ers and my Arizona Cardinals. I am not excited for this game whatsoever, but now we have a split backfield in San Francisco because Elijah Mitchell has returned and is a thing apparently still. Even though they have Christian McCaffrey, they don't care. They're going to use both of these running backs, and that's not ideal, right? But it's not deadly either. If there is a team in the NFL that can support 2 running backs, San Francisco is going to be one of them. Think of a Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr. situation right now in Miami. Coincidence that both those guys came from San Francisco? It really shouldn't be. This is how San Francisco has been since Kyle Shanahan has taken over. They use multiple running backs. Now, from a greedy fantasy perspective, we want it to all go to Christian McCaffrey, but that's probably not going to happen. Both these guys are going to hover right around 15 touches a game. Now they're going up against Arizona, who allows over 21 fantasy points per contest. No major injuries of concern here. But even though the ceilings have to drop down for these guys because they're going to eat into each other's potential, both of these guys can score touchdowns at any given time. Both these guys could see 15 touches a week in a highly, highly productive offense that's going to provide them with scoring opportunities. You have weapons on the outside like Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. So the boxes aren't going to be stacked. The volume may be lower, but the efficiency could be higher. And that's why I'm going to continue to start CMC. Now, if I'm saying all that, why am I not starting Elijah Mitchell either? Last week was a great matchup for them going up against the Chargers. Like we said earlier, the Chargers allow a lot to opposing running backs. A little bit different story here. Arizona's a little bit better overall, and I kind of want to see how do they respond with Elijah Mitchell again. Do they run him out there and give him those 15 plus touches? As much as I think he hovers right around that number, I want to see it again before I trust it in my lineup. Maybe you're in desperation mode. I would start Elijah Mitchell over some of the other guys that I sat higher up in this video for sure, just because of the backfield that he plays in, but I prefer to give it another week, which means we'll end it off here with James Conner, and he hadn't scored a touchdown since week 1 and hadn't broken 55 yards rushing in a game all year, and then went for 21 carries, 69 yards, and 2 touchdowns against the Rams last week. And then after the game, the Cardinals waived Eno Benjamin. Boy, did that escalate quickly. I guess that means that they're really comfortable with the health of James Conner, though, right? If you're going to let Eno Benjamin go, and a game in which James Conner just had over 20 touches, you should feel pretty comfortable, especially since Kyler Murray is also not 100% healthy, but says a lot for their trust in James Conner. But now they're going against the 49ers. They are the number 1 team in the NFL, allowing the fewest points per game to opposing running backs at 14.4 per contest, and they just shut down Austin Ekeler last week. This offense banged up. Multiple injuries on the offensive line still in Arizona. Kyler Murray, does he play this week? Zach Ertz is going to miss time. They're still without Hollywood Brown. A lot of question marks here, but James Conner didn't seem to care about any of that last week in a very difficult matchup going up against the Rams. There just hasn't been any stability or consistency here to want to start James Conner. Now, my gut says I should probably start James Conner due to the amount of volume he's going to get, but everything on paper says that you probably shouldn't start James Conner. If Arizona gets down early in this game, which is very possible due to this high-powered offense in San Francisco, we could see very little James Conner, so there's a lot of risk there. Like I said, I want to start James Conner, and that is not my inner Arizona Cardinal fan speaking. In fantasy football, if a guy's going to approach 20 touches, I tell you all the time, it makes him a borderline start regardless of anything else. I'm just worried about everything else here, so we have to wait and see how it finds out. But for right now, I got him as a sit. But there you have it, my starts and sits for the running back position here for Week 11 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you some information. If I was, do me a favor, hit that like button down below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing so, because we got you covered all year long. We don't take the off season off. We talk football all year to make sure you have all the information you need. Remember, hit the like button, leave a comment, get your account signed up at Pristine Auction right now, because we'll be giving this signed Lamar Jackson jersey away in just 1 week. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But hopefully you guys you have a great rest of your day here today, a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you later.